Hello everybody, I'm George Puddy and today I'm going to be showing you my Premier League table predictions for the 2022-23 season. Now the Premier League table is infamously hard to predict because a team at the start of the season barely resembles a team at the end of the season. It's always hard to predict that, and I haven't really had that much luck in the past. I always try and do it, and yeah, I never have much luck really. There's certain teams that I just base it too much on last season, or too many teams that I don't base it enough on last season, and yeah, I think I'm quite confident in this year's though. I put a lot of thought into these, and yeah, hopefully they're right. Obviously my table last year, let's have a look at that. Some howlers in there really. I managed to get two right, one Chelsea in third. That was a pretty easy one. I feel like most people got that other than the loonies who predicted Chelsea to win the league. And Brentford in 13th, which I'm extremely happy with because lots of people predicted them to go down. Not many people predicted them to stay up, let alone predicting the exact position they finish, which I managed to do in 13th. So yeah, I really rated Brentford, and yeah, I knew they'd do well, and yeah, I'm very happy to manage to predict them correctly in 13th place. That's a win, but there were some howlers. Arsenal in 8th, Leicester in 5th. That's what I'm talking about, why I based it too much on the season prior. It was sort of obvious Leicester would slip away and Arsenal would do better than the season before. Obviously Liverpool didn't win the league, but they came close, so yeah, I guess my faith wasn't that badly placed really, and ultimately the Newcastle one looks like a howler, but it's really hard to predict Newcastle because obviously I was predicting them when they had Steve Bruce in manager and Mike Ashley still in charge. I wasn't to know that halfway through the season they'd get taken over by some Saudi royal family and that would propel them up the league with infinite cash. Southampton relegated, another one that made sense at the time but perhaps wasn't the best in retrospect. But yeah, those weren't too bad. Only two correct doesn't look great, but ultimately they weren't horrific. They weren't as bad as my year before where I predicted West Ham and Villa to go down, and yeah, that horrendous. Yeah, I didn't do too bad last year, but hopefully I do better this year, and I'm pretty confident because I put a lot of thought into these. So without further ado, let's go on to my predictions. In last place, I've gone for Bournemouth. Maybe a predictable place to put them. Most people have put them bottom or to be relegated. I don't like to be predictable, but ultimately I just can't see them staying up. Mainly because they just haven't signed anyone. Now, I don't think they should have gone out and signed loads of players like Forest. I'll get onto them later. But they should have signed someone. Because really, it's not just that they haven't signed anyone. They've lost loan players. In terms of someone like Nathaniel Phillips, they don't have Gary Cahill anymore. So they're looking very light in that centre-back position, and they played a 4-3-3, attacking football as the top teams in the Championship usually do. However, there's a chance that they perhaps try and switch to be more pragmatic like Brentford did last season, playing a 3-5-2 with Kiefer Moore and Dominic Solanke up top. And if they do that, then all of a sudden the signing of Marcus Tavernier actually makes sense because he played in that left side of a central midfield in that exact position at Middlesbrough last season, so that could prove to be a good signing. But other than him really, you've got some depth players in terms of someone like Ryan Fredericks, but ultimately they just haven't really strengthened, and as I said, they're looking lighter in that centre-back position than ever before. Chris Mepham, who was arguably fourth choice centre-back last season, if they're playing a free, he's going to be starting, and they're looking weaker than they were last season, which isn't a great thing when you're going up to the Premier League, to look weaker than you did in the Championship ultimately. They do have some good players, and Dominic Solanke had a good season last season in the Championship, but ultimately he's never been that good at Premier League level. That could change though, I don't know. And there's questions about Scott Parker as a manager. He's never really done it. Obviously he was okay at Fulham, but it wasn't top level. He didn't keep them up really. They've got some good players, but I don't know, I just think they do need to strengthen in a couple of key areas just to make sure they're as good as they were last season, let alone better. I do figure that they probably will in around deadline day, but could that be too late if they have a few dodgy results because their first few fixtures aren't all that kind to Bournemouth? Should they go on a bad run, I could see them struggling a bit like Norwich last year. The fact they haven't really signed anyone, I'd say could be down to the fact that they were unsure if they were going to be pragmatic, play a 3-5-2 or a 4-3-3, but the fact that they're a bit indecisive of what direction they want to go, also could be a stickling point because they might not be that used to playing this more pragmatic style of football. So they could have a good season, Bournemouth. They could surprise everyone, but I don't really see it. It's an obvious pick, but ultimately I can't really see any other position for Bournemouth than 20th place. In 19th position, I've gone for Brentford. Yes, I'm predicting Brentford to be victims of second season syndrome, as is often the case with a team that comes up, surprises everyone, and in the second season they struggle because teams sort of figure them out, and you'll face a lot more challenges than you did in the first season, i.e. injuries. Leeds found that out the hard way last season and only just survived. Brentford were very impressive last season, however, about at the halfway point they did sort of struggle. They started off being very pragmatic, ditching the progressive sort of 4-3-3 they played in the Championship in favour of a 3-5-2. It worked to start off with being compact, but they ultimately weren't creating that many chances. Tony got quite isolated, and ultimately it worked to start with, but it sort of cost them and they were slipping down the table before Christian Eriksen comes in. So Christian Eriksen came in, incredible player, too good for Brentford really, and he completely changed their fortune. So all of a sudden you had an attacking verve in that Brentford team. They switched back to the 4-3-3 and they had a very impressive second half of the season. Eriksen's gone now, and that could mean that Brentford could go back to the pragmatic style that they had in the early half of last season, when ultimately they didn't really have an attacking midfielder, which could work, but ultimately teams sort of figured that out relatively quickly, could struggle. They have a couple of players who could fill that verb. Josh Da Silva could be like a new signing, ultimately, because he was injured practically all of last season. He could fill that Eriksen void. They're linked with Damsgaard, which would be a good signing. However, at the time we're recording this video, they haven't actually signed him yet, and there is a bit of a risk with Damsgaard, even though I think he's a phenomenal player, and 12 months ago I wanted Liverpool to sign him. Apparently he's had issues with arthritis, so it could be a bit of a risk. I don't know, but it's still up in the air whether they'll actually sign him, so I can't really factor him into this because they just simply haven't signed him. It's only a rumour at this stage. So they could switch to the pragmatism, they could continue playing this style of football, but without Eriksen that could be tricky. And as I said, teams have sort of figured them out. They were an unknown entity last season. That's not the case this season. Also injuries. They had very few injuries last season to key players. Ivan Toney, he never had a long spell out, and if you look at the squad at Brentford, good players, but not really a backup striker for Ivan Toney. He's so crucial to them. If he was to have a long spell out like Patrick Bamford at Leeds last season, I think Brentford could really struggle. So losing Eriksen and potentially losing a player like Ivan Toney to injury, that could hurt them because they had very few injuries in terms of key positions in an attacking sense, because I know they had centre-back injuries last season. I think that'll change this season because what challenges you don't face in the first season you'll probably have in the second. So I like Brentford, they're a likeable team, but I do think that teams might have them figured out. It's not going to be as easy this time around, and losing Christian Eriksen, I think that's going to hit them more than most people realise, even if they do bring in someone like Damsgaard. I'm just not sure it'll click as well as it did with Eriksen in this team. So yeah, unfortunately I like Brentford, and I could be wrong on this, but I do fear that they will suffer the case of second season syndrome, as many teams do. In 18th place, I've gone for Nottingham Forest. Now, I almost had them staying up and the team that's in 17th going down, but I ultimately switched it last minute, and Forest have been a bit of an enigma in terms of where I put them. I've been umming and ahhing about them for quite a while, because when they got promoted I thought they'd be in the mould of a Brentford, a Sheffield United, a Huddersfield, in terms of a team that hasn't been up for ages. Nottingham Forest haven't been in the Premier League for 20 years, so the fans are like, oh my god, they're on cloud nine. Really, the fans are on cloud nine, the players are on cloud nine, the whole club's on cloud nine, because they've just been promoted, having not been up for ages, in a campaign that they just simply didn't expect promotion from. And you've got a lot of players there who haven't played in the Premier League before. They're buzzing. The team is very much sort of an unknown entity, and that's what you got with Brentford, with Sheffield United, these sorts of teams. And when they got promoted I thought Forest will be that, especially under a very astute manager like Steve Cooper. But the key to those other three teams that I mentioned is smart recruitment, and Forest have not been doing that. Now ultimately this is what made me think they're less of a Sheffield United and they're more of a Fulham or and Aston Villa in their respective seasons when they got promoted. Fulham 18-19, Villa 19-20. In terms of, you essentially just go out and sign everyone. I've been very disappointed in the transfers made by Forest. Some of them are really good, and it started off well. Awoniyi is an excellent pickup from Union Berlin, I think it was where they signed him. Excellent replacement for Kiernan Davis. I think Lingard, it's worth taking, a punt on him, really a quality player on his day. Lewis O'Brien, quality operator in that midfield to replace James Garner. Someone like Nico Williams to replace Shed Spence, very good signing. Omar Richards on the other side. Dean Henderson as well on loan, an improvement in that goalkeeper position. So ultimately, these are good signings. And then they went out and signed more players, and then more players, and then more players, and they're linked with signing even more players. And it does strike me a bit of a Fulham, really, in terms of you don't really know which players will be good enough. You can't identify a player and say, he's my guy, right, in that position. So you're just sort of saying, I don't know if any of these players will be good enough. I can't really decide if one player is good enough. So let's just buy loads of players, and surely one of them, fingers crossed, will be good enough. But that's just not a good thing, because ultimately you'll get loads of players of a similar quality who all want to start, and ultimately not only will that cause unrest in the dressing room because you'll constantly have selection headaches, you won't have a settled team, you won't know what your best team is, be rotating all the time, players unhappy that they're not starting. But ultimately, you can't gel a team like that together quickly. It'll take time. And ultimately, the problem is when you spend lots of money, which Forest have, and they're rumoured to be spending even more. Quality, too much quality arguably, too many players with a similar ability in the squad, that it will unsettle the squad. The new players won't be happy because they're not playing. The players who got you up won't be happy because they got you up and all of a sudden they're being discarded. They're not being given a chance anymore. And that will just create a very unhappy atmosphere, and it's hard to create team cohesion and team spirit with all of this, with this disruption, which ultimately is so key to teams when they come up. I mentioned Brentford, Sheffield United. I thought Forest would be one of them, but the thing is they made very smart, unlimited moves in the transfer market while keeping a core squad of unity and team spirit together. And ultimately, I think it puts a lot of pressure on Steve Cooper. I like him as a manager, but ultimately when you spend a lot of money and you have a lot of players, ultimately that puts pressure on you, because surely if you can't get a good enough tune out of this quality good amount of players, then surely it's your fault. So you're going to be gone pretty soon if you can't get a tune out of them, because this is a quality group of players that has had a lot of money spent on it. So surely someone else can get a better tune out of them than you can. It's your fault. A bit of a Slavisa Jokanovic. If Fulham don't spend all that money and bring in all those players, he probably lasts a lot longer and possibly Fulham stay up. It's a similar position I feel for Steve Cooper. A quality manager, but there's a lot of pressure on him now because they've spent a lot of money. And if he can't get a tune-up out of these 60 bazillion players that he's got, which I think he will struggle to, then I can see him being sacked, someone else coming in, it again not working, and it just being a pretty dismal season for Forest fans on their return. I wanted them to be a Brentford, and ultimately I really thought they would be. That's why I was umming and ahhing, but I just can't overlook their terrible transfer strategy. Ultimately, some of the signings in isolation are alright, but when you just have those sheer amount of signings, it's not going to work in my opinion. I just can't see a world in which this works. And I can see them going down, which is disappointing for Forest fans. But I think that the transfer strategy has been really poor. So in 17th place, I've gone for Everton. Now, I almost had them going down and Forest staying up. I switched it last minute. Now, Everton don't have a very good team, and they massively underperformed last season. Obviously, in a relegation battle, no one expected that. Benitez goes halfway through the season, Frank Lampard comes in. They just about survived, but obviously they relied a lot on Richarlison. He's gone. They haven't really replaced him, and Calvert-Lewin out for 6 weeks as well. So your two best players essentially gone. They haven't really replaced them. They've signed Dwight McNeil, who can obviously play on the wing, but he's more of a traditional winger than a forward like Richarlison. And you're not really going to be playing Salman Rondon up front for a long period of time, really. So they do need to sign a replacement striker, especially if Calvert-Lewin's injuries persist. So that's two positions that really, they need to sign a replacement. They haven't done either, really. So you're lacking your two best forward players and your two best players, really, generally. Tarkowski and McNeil, solid signings, were solid for Burnley for a number of seasons. But ultimately, if you're going to sign players from a relegated Premier League side, you're probably going to be in and around a relegation battle yourself. It seems like Frank wants to make them solid at the back, but that means they're probably not going to score that many goals, and obviously without a recognised striker up there with Calvert-Lewin's injury, no Richarlison, they could play Rondon, maybe Gordon as a false line or something mad like that. End of the day, they're not going to score many goals ultimately, so they could be solid, probably not going to score many goals. And yeah, the signings, they haven't really been that inspiring, especially in terms of the positions they actually need to strengthen. They haven't really strengthened. Ultimately, there's still questions over Frank Lampard as a manager. I don't think he'll last the season because he seems a bit tactically naive. What even is his football philosophy? I couldn't really tell you, to be honest with you, but ultimately I think they will stay up. There is a chance that perhaps Frank goes halfway through the season to bring in someone like Sean Dyche, which I could see happening actually, who makes them solid and they just about survive over the line. Regardless, I think that they'll just have enough, but it'll be just, I don't think they've really strengthened in the right areas. The squad's got worse than last season, and ultimately I'm not sure Lampard's the man. So whereas people were saying last season was a shock season, I think that trajectory could continue. So just about survive, but it won't be a very good season for Everton fans, unfortunately for them, but good for me being a Liverpool fan. Now, in 16th place, I've gone for Southampton. Now, people who watched my prediction video last year will know that I predicted Southampton to go down, and that was because they lost key players in Ings, Vestergaard, Bertrand, and they sort of replaced them with either young, unproven players from foreign leagues or young, really unproven players from big teams' academies who hadn't played much senior football. And ultimately, they didn't look like there was much quality in the team. Hasenhüttl is a very inconsistent manager who either looks like he could be pushing up to get a top job or on the verge of getting the sack from Southampton in the course of the same season. Very up and down, very inconsistent. And yeah, their trusting in the youth has always been a philosophy at Southampton, but it almost looks like they were replacing quality with young inexperience and unprovenness, and it looked like a recipe for disaster. Yet they stayed up reasonably comfortably. And it sort of taught me to never bet against Southampton, which is why, looking at the squad, it's the same issues really. They've lost a key player in someone like Armando Broja, and they've replaced him with young and inexperienced players. The players they brought in, the signings, have been for minimal fees, young and, inexperienced again. People like Koshap and Sekumara, who will probably fit into Southampton's system well. Sekumara from Bordeaux, yes, is unproven at this level, yes, is very young, but is a pressing forward who should fit well into Ralph Hasenhüttl's Southampton system as a natural Armando Broja replacement to partner Shea Adams. You've also got Lavia from the City Youth Academy, again, very young, I believe 20 or maybe even under 20. Defensive midfielder, sort of a natural sort of successor to someone like Oriol Romeu, but again, unproven, young. All the players they've signed, I believe, are 20 or under 20. That's very young, very inexperienced. Seems like a recipe for disaster, really. But Hasenhüttl on his day is a very good manager who seems to be able to get the most out of the limited resources he has and being able to really elevate the youth like he did with someone like Tino Livramento last season. And even though on paper it seems like, yeah, they could be going down, as I said, last season has taught me to not really bet against Southampton. Yeah, they look like they're going down, but Southampton are one of those teams who just don't really go down, I don't think. Bold words, I said that about Burnley last season. They obviously got relegated. But yeah, I just look at that team, and even though it looks like it's very young and inexperienced, signings to replace key players, it should go badly. History has taught me that it'll probably go well. Sort of a solid season. I think they will be in a little bit of a relegation battle, really. They ended last season very poorly. It will be tough for Southampton. They also sort of have the knack to, if they go 1-0 up and then concede a goal, they can sort of crumble at that point and concede a few more. So they're another team, Southampton, but ultimately, even though their transfer strategy of signing young and experienced players to replace very key players may seem a bit odd, it's worked for them before, so I see no reason why it shouldn't work for them again. In 15th position, I've gone for Leeds. Now, Leeds are an interesting one, because if you asked me at the end of last season, I would have said Leeds are arguably my favourites to go down, mainly because they only just survived. They had a pretty dismal season last season, and ultimately, I'm just not sure about Jesse Marsch. Obviously, he's an accomplished manager. He did very good things at the New York Red Bulls, as well as at RB Salzburg. Obviously, he had a pretty dismal spell at Leipzig last season. And I think the thing is with Jesse Marsch, and it's a bit unfair, I don't know if just it's the fact that he's American. Obviously, Americans haven't had a great track record in the Premier League. I don't think it's just that he's American. There's just something about him where he just doesn't look like he's a good manager. I don't know what it is. I think it's maybe the demeanour. He almost looks too nice, and not in like a Jurgen Klopp way where he's really nice but you know that you don't want to get on the wrong side of him. He almost seems as if someone that doesn't have that authority, that if the players just wanted to do whatever they wanted and walk all over him, he'd almost be like fine with that. He gives me off the vibe of a young inexperienced manager, even though he's not really that. So I think that might be a bit unfair to Jesse Marsch, really, because it's just sort of a vibe I get off him that he probably won't survive in the Premier League just because he's almost too nice, which may be completely disingenuous because it's not really based on his tactics. It's just sort of a vibe I get off that I thought Leeds didn't have a very good season, and it's just something about Jesse Marsch. I don't see him lasting that long in this Leeds job. And then if you told me they'd sold their two best players in Phillips and Rafinha, I would have said, yep, going down. However, they have made some very good signings using the cash that they got for Rafinha and Calvin Phillips, which are big losses, but they were very key to how someone like Marcelo Bielsa played. However, the signings that Jesse Marsch has brought in are very much Jesse Marsch signings. So someone like Tyler Adams, who is an amazing signing for Leeds, that's an incredible signing. He's obviously American, he's known Jesse Marsch a very long time because Marsch brought him in initially at the New York Red Bulls. So Marsch knows him well, and he is a very good replacement for Calvin Phillips, possibly the best they could have done. I still don't know how Leeds have managed to pull off the signing of Tyler Adams. It's excellent, as well as Mark Roca from Bayern Munich. That's another one. That's a very good double pivot for Leeds. They just need to sort of bed them in with time to gel, but when they gel, that'll be a very good double pivot for them. As well as this, Brendan Aronson, an American player from Salzburg, looks very good as well as Christensen, another Salzburg player, as well, and Sinistera from Feyenoord is a very good winger who are, adding to that excellent collection of wingers that they've got, where they've got him and obviously Jack Harrison and Daniel James as well. So some very good signings for Leeds. The only issue that Marsch is, it's both a positive and a negative, is all the players are very distinctly Jesse Marsch players. Even lots of players from his former employers at Salzburg, lots of American players as well, all very skilled in playing the Jesse Marsch way. So he's got his Jesse Marsch team now that's distinctly him, distinctly his identity, that 4-2-2-2, which should work. And now that he's got his team and he's not working with Bielsa's tools, they could really push on. And we've seen Marsch manage a good team before, so they could really push on and show what Marsch ball is all about. A slight downside to that is if it's not going well, because the players are all distinctly him, it's clear that he's had a very heavy hand in recruitment and they're going to be playing his way. If they're not playing well, then ultimately the only decision would be to sack Marsch, because ultimately it's so distinctly him and his identity in that team that if it's not working, then clearly he's the issue and he will go. So it could put a bit of added pressure on him that now he's sort of ride or die by his tactics, but ultimately they could do very well as well for Leeds. So even though initially I thought maybe I could have them down, ultimately the signings have been very impressive. It's just a case of whether Jesse Marsch is up to the task. I'd say they'll be roughly fine. Nothing amazing, but sort of a bedding in for tactics for Jesse Marsch's team. It could either go amazingly well or horribly wrong. I think it will be a solid season for Leeds. Not really in a relegation battle, but not hitting the dizzying heights either. But yeah, it's sort of a interesting one for Leeds. There will be an interesting one to watch out for this season, I think. In 14th place, I've gone for Fulham. Now, many people have predicted Fulham to go down, but I honestly think this will be the year that Fulham actually stay up. Now, obviously, Fulham have become a bit of a yo-yo team in recent years. The last 2 times they got promoted, they've gone straight back down and then gone straight back up. So in, 5 seasons, 3 out of the last 5 seasons, Fulham have been in the Premier League. They really need to stay up, honestly. I just getting boring just seeing Fulham go up and go back down. Please, one of you or Norwich actually survive, please, for good Lord's sake. I actually think they will this season. They're giving me sort of vibes of Wolves. You remember Wolves when they got promoted in 2018, and you got the inkling that the signings were very smart and they were off the high of being, absolutely dominating the Championship, and they just look like, this is a team that is going to stay up and won't be in a relegation battle. I'm getting that vibe from Fulham. It is just a vibe, but I think the recruitment's been very clever. In the past, obviously, when they got promoted in 2018, they had the whole fiasco where they signed practically everyone, and it was a complete and utter disaster. And then a couple of seasons ago, when they got promoted again, they also signed lots of players, lots of them loans, some of the players ended up being alright, but there didn't really seem to be all that much smart recruitment, really. This season, I think there has been some smart recruitment. They haven't signed all too many players, but the players they have signed, I think, are very smart additions, especially João Palhinha, the defensive midfielder who was excellent in the Portuguese league last season. How Fulham have got him, I don't know. That's a very clever bit of business. As well as someone like Kevin Mbabu, obviously an excellent right back, the man from Switzerland, and for only 5 million from Wolfsburg, in comparison to what they would have had to spend to get Nico Williams back from Liverpool, who's obviously gone to Forest now, who's a good signing for them, but what was that, 17.5 million compared to 5 million from Mbabu? That's very clever business. And also Ben Leno as well, a keeper who was arguably just too good for them. So all very good signings, really. And I just get the impression this season, if Mitrovic can keep firing, which is a bit of a misconception last time Fulham were in the Premier League in terms of Mitrovic. Parker didn't really rate him, which is why he didn't play many games. He was mostly used as a substitute. He liked sort of Adamola Lookman in almost a 4-9 role, and then Josh Masher. Mitrovic was never really first choice at Fulham a couple of seasons back, which is why he didn't score many goals. But Silva likes him, and the system is made to get the most out of Mitrovic, and if he can score lots of goals and bully defenders, which we know he can do, then I think he will score enough goals to keep Fulham up. So I think this will be a really solid season for Fulham. There's questions over Marco Silva that I have, because he's only really rated off of a half-decent half season, or at Hull, in which he didn't even keep them up. He was pretty dreadful at Watford and at Everton. But he was good at Fulham last year, so there's questions over Marco Silva. But I don't know, I just get an impression off of Fulham. I've been really impressed with their business in the window. I think it's been very smart, very astute, and it's the business of a club that I just think will stay up reasonably comfortably as well. So maybe surprising, but I've got Fulham in 14th place. In 13th position, I've gone for Leicester, which by their standards would really dictate a very disappointing season for the Foxes, and I just sort of have an inkling that this Leicester team may have reached the end of its cycle and it's going a bit stale at the King Power Stadium. Obviously Rodgers, we know, is a good manager, but this team has sort of been together for a while, and obviously last season they didn't have a great season. They were punching above their weight, finishing 5th in the previous 2 seasons. They sort of recovered to finish 8th last season, but for most of it they were in and around the lower mid-table. It wasn't a good season for Leicester. They did have injuries, but ultimately you're sort of seeing areas of the team and sort of seeing where are you improving, really. Jamie Vardy has been such a key pivotal player for Leicester ever since they were promoted to the Premier League all those years ago, and ultimately he's aging, and you would have said in previous seasons, but he doesn't look like he is, but he is now getting injured, he's picking up injuries, he doesn't look like the player he was, and obviously he was injured for quite a large spell last season. And the thing is, when you've got such a key pivotal player in someone like Jamie Vardy, who's so key to how a team like Leicester operate, you need a good replacement, and Patson Daka looked like he'd be that man when he signed from RB Salzburg. He struggled last season. I think it's a big season for him this season. Can he step up and really take on that mantle and prove to be Jamie Vardy's successor? It's a big season for someone like Patson Daka to prove why they spent the money on him. They've obviously got good players like Harvey Barnes and Maddison. However, it's still up in the air whether Tielemans and Fofana will be here at the end of the season. And ultimately, I think the biggest thing is why I've put Leicester here is they haven't signed anyone. Now, sometimes that's not always an issue. They've obviously lost Kasper Schmeichel, but I don't necessarily know if they need to replace him. Danny Ward's a decent goalkeeper, and ultimately Kasper Schmeichel wasn't very good last season. But I think the thing is they haven't signed anyone. Sometimes you just need sort of fresh blood in the team, especially after such a disappointing season like last season. They're the only team who haven't signed anyone in the Premier League, and it seems like Rodgers isn't very happy with that. You see him in press conferences, he seems a bit irritated. He seems as if he wants to be buying players, and for some reason they're not doing that. So is there a bit of unhappiness between Rodgers and the board? Is it going a bit stale at Leicester? It could have just been a bad season and maybe they'll be back up to the dizzying heights of 5th again, but I can't really see it. I can see it almost being the end of the cycle for Leicester, and maybe Rodgers doesn't stay beyond this season. In 12th position, I've gone for Brighton and Hove Albion. Now, Graham Potter's Brighton are very interesting. They're the XG merchants, as everyone say. They have lots of the ball, they play nice football, create loads and loads of chances, but never put the ball in the back of the net because they just don't have that clinical goal scorer. And they've sort of refused to have that clinical goal scorer for a while. It was sort of thought that Neil Maupay might be that man. He's not really proved to be. Danny Welbeck isn't that man really, especially not in the year of 2022. And they've sort of avoided buying a striker, really. However, this summer they have actually bought one. It's a transfer that's sort of gone under the radar, but Dennis Undav, they signed from Union Saint-Gilloise in the Belgian Pro League, and even though obviously the Belgian Pro League, it isn't the best league in the world, he scored a ridiculous amount of goals last season, especially as Saint-Gilloise only just got promoted and almost won the Belgian Pro League, which is quite an incredible feat in and of itself. So he could be really the surprise package. Obviously he's a little bit unproven in the Premier League, so whether he can be that clinical man that Brighton have been needing for ages, I don't know, but he could be. It's a little interesting signing that could be a genius bit of business for Brighton. I think the key to Brighton is how fluid they are, really. In terms of you take key players out, it doesn't really matter. Last season they sold Ben White, didn't really need to replace him. This season they've sold Marc Cucurella as well as Yves Bissouma. Haven't really replaced them, and you get the feeling that they don't really need to, because the genius of Brighton scouting is ultimately you can buy someone from sort of not really looked at league, someone like Jacob Moda from the Polish league, or someone like I believe it's the Japanese player they signed from the J League, who's come back from loan, coincidentally from Union Saint-Gilloise as well. Could be up for a good season as well. Obviously, the biggest one being Moises Caicedo, who came, I believe, from the Colombian League. He obviously came from a spell out on loan. He's come into the team and has been excellent and is really almost like-for-like replacement for Yves Bissouma. So I think the thing is with Brighton's clever scouting, they can look at young, high-potential players from leagues that aren't really talked about, loan them out for a season, bring them into the fold, and they're almost your replacements. They don't have to spend much money. The scouting network at Brighton is incredible, and Potter is a very astute manager in terms of just sort of the off-the-pitch side of things as well as on the pitch. So I think it could be a successful season for Brighton. Obviously, it's just a case of can they score as many chances as they create is ultimately the big one. Will Undav be the man? I don't know. And ultimately, will they suffer from losing arguably their two best players? History suggests that they might not, but they could struggle. We don't know. So ultimately, I'd say a solid sort of mid-table season for Brighton in 12th position, about roughly where they sort of finish each year, clear of a relegation battle, but not really pushing for Europe. In 11th position, I've gone for Wolves, one position lower than where they finished last season. Now, if you look at Wolves, they've got a very good team, they've got lots of good players, and they're managed by a very tactically astute manager in Bruno Lage. My main issue with Wolves, however, is they're very similar to Brighton, whereas in terms of how Lage sets them up, they create lots of chances, they have lots of the ball, they play very nice football, but they just struggle to put the ball in the back of the net. So they're very high in terms of XG, but not very high in terms of goals. Obviously, I think Wolves need a lot of credit actually. They're going into their 5th consecutive season back in the Premier League after they were promoted in 2018. And they've never been in a relegation battle in any of those 4 previous seasons, which I think just needs to be given a lot of credit to Wolves in the Wolves hierarchy, because it's unusual for a team to be promoted to never be in a relegation battle, and they're going into their 5th consecutive season. I don't think they'll be in a relegation battle this time around either. Obviously, when they came up, Nuno set them up in terms of that 3 at the back. It was counter-attacking football, solid at the back, catch them on the break, and it worked well, but obviously Jimenez's injury meant that Nuno then struggled with that because it relied on, being consistent in terms of scoring goals, which obviously when you take Jimenez out of the team, Wolves struggled to score a lot of goals, which is why Nuno struggled in his final season. Obviously Bruno Lage comes in, he thinks let's go away with the counter-attack and let's play more possession, chance creation football, which he did last season. He kept the same formation but just added just more possession into it. So he used the same formation but changed the style of play slightly, and they created lots of chances, had lots of possession, and they were incredibly solid at the back. Suspiciously so, Jose Sarr was incredible, probably goalkeeper of the season I'd say, but the main issue is that Jimenez isn't the same player since he's returned from his injury. So they create lots of chances and they're just not being able to score the goals, which is costing them in big moments. They've loaned out Fabio Silva to Anderlecht, so Jimenez is their only recognisable forward. And to me, they just need another striker, whether to add competition to Jimenez or outright replace him. Just because Jimenez was a monster in those first 2 seasons in the Premier League, but he's clearly not the same player. And the amount of chances that Wolves create and the very good creative players that they have, ultimately they just need someone to be on the end of those chances to get results. And the fact that they haven't signed a striker, similar to Brighton, just means that they have the potential to really progress, but they're almost hindering themselves by just not buying that key player. Also, there's almost a bit of a dour mood at Wolves. You see Bruno Lage in press conferences, he seems a bit irritated, and they didn't end last season very well. They really had 8th place almost confirmed, really. They were miles ahead of whoever was in 9th, and then they just had a terrible run of results and ended up finishing in 10th. As well as that, they're switching to a back 4, which should make them even better on the ball and even better in chance creation, but they could lose some of that defensive stability that they had last season, and obviously it's going to take them a little bit of time to adjust to that formation. However, I think Nathan Collins is a very smart signing, a very young, progressive centre-back, good at Burnley last season. And I think Gibbs White is almost a new signing. Even though he's obviously been at Wolves for a while, he had a very good loan spell at Sheffield United last season, and he's almost like a new signing to this Wolves team. So yeah, I think it could take a little bit of time for them to really settle into this new formation. But ultimately, I think it'll be a solid season for Wolves, but without that recognised clinical goal scorer, I think they'll just sort of be roughly mid-table, creating lots of chances, but not being able to score lots of goals, unfortunately. Same issues as last season, really. In 10th place now, and I've gone for Aston Villa. Now, Aston Villa are a bit of an enigma, really, because they seem to have a ridiculous amount of player pull and a lot of money, really, and this should be a good thing, really, because they signed really good players. Obviously the big one is he's in on a permanent now. He was obviously on loan last season. Felipe Coutinho, formerly one of my favourite players when he played at Liverpool, and you know, it's an incredible signing for Aston Villa. They've got the firepower of Ings and Watkins up front, the depth of Bertrand Traore, Leon Bailey, Emi Buendia, just in that attacking position alone. They've obviously signed Boubacar Kamara on a free transfer as well. Again, how have they pulled that one off? Jacob Ramsey, John McGinn in those midfield positions, as well as Morgan Sanson, Douglas Luiz, Marvellous Nakamba as well, and even Diego Carlos in a backline that already contains Lucas Digne, Ezri Konsa, Matty Cash, and Callum Chambers, and Tyrone Mings to back up, and then Emi Martinez in goal. It's an incredible Villa side, really. Really good, and a lot of money has been spent on it, so really, why shouldn't they be pushing up for Europe? I'm a bit worried about Steven Gerrard. Now, it's not because I don't think he's a good manager, it's because I do think he's a good manager who's very good at Rangers, and Gerrard, formerly my favourite Liverpool player when I was younger. I actually cried the day when he announced he was leaving Liverpool. But yeah, I love Gerrard, and I really want him to do well because I want him to take over from Jurgen Klopp when Jurgen Klopp eventually leaves. But I just have a bad feeling about Villa because there's a lot of pressure on Steven Gerrard because he has been backed now. Many people always go on about you need to back the manager, you need to back the manager. Steven Gerrard has been backed and then some. He's had a lot of money to spend in just half a season at Aston Villa, and he's gotten all the players he could want and then some to create his team that should really be pushing for Europe, really. It's easily the 7th best squad in the league. I don't know though, because as I said, there's lots of pressure, and this season could make or break Steven Gerrard, because yes, Villa have backed him, so now it's, we've given you the players and the resources, so you need to be pushing on for Europe at this point, because there should be no excuses, because he's got such an incredible team. However, things really, very rarely work on paper, and that's why I'm not predicting Villa to go into Europe, because I just have an inkling. They keep on spending money, throwing money at it, they keep on buying all these incredible players. Douglas Luiz and Marvellous Nakamba were good. Now you've got Boubacar Kamara in that holding midfielder position. It's an incredible team, but ultimately that puts a lot of pressure on Gerrard to put all these characters, glue them together and perform. And I don't know, I think it could be a season where Villa push up into Europe, or it could be one where they really struggle and ultimately Gerrard gets the sack, because with this amount of money and this much quality in a team, you really need to be doing a bit better than they did last season. Lower mid-table wasn't really good enough for Gerrard given the players that he's got. So yeah, I'm a bit worried about Gerrard, really. I think it could either go really well or he could struggle just because of the pressure now on him to get the most out of this incredible team. Is he the man? I don't know, but Villa are more likely to keep the players than keep the manager, so to speak. So I've put in 10th, which would be a decent season for Villa, but isn't really probably what they'd be wanting. If they don't get top half, I think Gerrard's definitely gone, really, but ultimately I think it would be a bit of a disappointment for them if they don't get Europe. In 9th place, I've gone for Crystal Palace. Now, Crystal Palace are a team that really excites me, actually, because under Patrick Vieira, they've got some incredible, young, promising attacking players. They play good possession-based football, and they're just a joy to watch, really, Crystal Palace. And they had a pretty good season last season, especially after all the players that left, as well as obviously losing the manager in Roy Hodgson. They obviously changed the way they were playing, brought more young blood into the team. It could have gone badly. It went the reverse. They had a really good season under Patrick Vieira. And yeah, as I said, they just got some really good young players. People like Elise, Eberechi Eze, who will be like a new signing coming back from injury. People say that they've lost Conor Gallagher, which they have. Obviously, he's gone back to Chelsea, but ultimately Eze coming in could fill in for him really in that midfield spot. Could be a really good season for him. They've obviously signed Cheick Doucouré, who is a very good signing for them to replace the outgoing Cheku Kouyaté, and they're very solid at the back as well. A back four of Nathaniel Klein, Joachim Anderson, Mark Guehi, and Tariq Mitchell is very solid, as well as the addition of Sam Johnston in goal. And yeah, they just play very nice football. And the thing is, when you've got sorts of young, promising players and they're all sort of improving at the same time, you're only naturally going to get better, as well as a youngish manager in Patrick Vieira, who is also going to get better tactically. So yeah, they're a very exciting team, Palace. I think everyone sort of likes Palace now, really. They're a very likeable team. And yeah, I just really like to see them do well, and I think they will actually. They haven't spent as much money as obviously someone like Aston Villa, but they've really made some very smart moves in the transfer market. I think the recruitment and profile of player has been excellent for Patrick Vieira's side. And I just think they had an excellent season last season, and they've only improved this season. So I think now it's just natural that they will push up and get top half. The only issue for them is, like some teams, they don't have that clinical finisher. Someone like Jean-Philippe Mateta, I don't think is really that guy in terms of scoring goals. Also, Edouard was played more on the wing last season than he was through the middle, and didn't get that many goals also. Obviously, someone like Christian Benteke is now finally left. I don't know how it's only now that he's left and it wasn't like 5 years ago. But yeah, he's finally gone. But yeah, I think it's really about getting that clinical finisher. If they do, to partner someone like Wilfried Zaha at the top of the pitch, honestly, this Palace team could be deadly. But yeah, I'm predicting an improved season for Crystal Palace, building on what they had last season to get a top 10 finish. Very excited about Palace this year. In 8th place, I've gone for Newcastle. Now, obviously, last season it was very hard to predict for Newcastle because no one really anticipated that they'd be bought out by essentially the King of Saudi Arabia, which they did, and now they have the richest owners in the world. Now, whatever you think of the ethics of the people who now own Newcastle, spoilers, they're not very nice people. But regardless of what you think of that, ultimately it's drastically improved Newcastle's fortunes on the pitch. Obviously, there's the money they spent in January to propel themselves far away from the relegation battle. But ultimately, Eddie Howe has been very good tactically in terms of improving the style of play and the spirit and belief in this Newcastle team. They were the best second halves of the season of any team last season, and continuing that momentum into this season, I just think they'll have a solid season. I don't think they'll get Europe, but I think there's a belief in this Newcastle team that wasn't there before, and there's a belief, but also there's not almost that much pressure, which is odd because you would have thought there'd be a lot of pressure given the money that they're supposedly spending, that the owners will want to propel them into the top 4 sooner rather than later. Well, they haven't spent that much money this summer. They've only really brought in Sven Botman, who is a very good signing. They wanted him in January, couldn't get him. They've now got him, now the centre-back from Lille. Very good, and I'm liking their transfer policy, Newcastle, actually. They haven't gone out and bought a load of mercenaries like some people are wanting them to. They've been very smart in terms of getting young, high potential, sort of wonder kids. Sometimes you'd say, oh, they could go to a top club. You'll say, no, come to Newcastle. Someone like a Sven Botman or Bruno Guimaraes, who obviously signed in January from Lyon. These sorts of players who are they are wonder kids, really, high potential wonder kids who you can lure to Newcastle to really build sort of your David Silvas or your Vincent Kompanies in comparison to the Manchester City project, but not making the mistake like City are buying your mercenaries like Robinho. They seem to have taken, on the feedback from where City went wrong initially, and they've been smart with their signings, as well as people like Dan Burn, Matty Targett, people who will really try and play for the badge and play in Eddie Howe's style. I think they've been really smart. Obviously, they've only signed Sven Botman, which immediately shores up that defence. It's looking very good now. They've obviously signed Nick Pope as well, who I did forget about actually, but he's a very good signing as well from Burnley. People say, oh, it's just Nick Pope from Burnley, couldn't they do better? But ultimately, you've got to think people are saying that Nick Pope should be a regular for England just a season ago. So it's odd how, short football fans' memories are, but he's very good in goal. It's a very solid goalkeeper for Newcastle. My only issue really is the right side of their front three. You've obviously got Son Maximin and Callum Wilson who score goals when fit, but ultimately they've been playing either Jacob Murphy, Ryan Fraser or Miguel Almiron on that right hand side. All decent players, but none of them really good enough to start for Newcastle given where they want to go. So if they can really solid up that right hand side, there have been talks about them going in for James Maddison. Seems like Leicester don't really want to sell. But if they shore up that right hand side, then ultimately I think, it could be a very good season for Newcastle. I don't think they'll get into Europe just yet, but I think they're being very smart with their signings and their natural sort of progression. So if you compare what they're doing to what Villa are doing, perhaps Villa's transfer strategy would have been what you would have expected from Newcastle, but they've been perhaps a bit smarter, and I think that eases the pressure on Eddie Howe a little bit in comparison to his compatriot in Steven Gerrard. In 7th place, I've gone for West Ham United, in the same position they finished last season in. And West Ham, they've strengthened quite a lot actually. Big signing in Gianluca Scamacca from Sassuolo. That's a very good signing, worth the highest potential wonder kids in terms of strikers out there. West Ham have got it. A natural upgrade on someone like Michail Antonio. They've also brought in depth in someone like Cornet from Burnley, like Aguard as well, to just bring more competition and quality to those centre-back positions. And obviously Areola on a permanent as well, who I'm surprised still isn't their number one, because he was very good at Fulham a couple of seasons ago. Odd, but I think he will probably progress into that number one spot this season. So yeah, West Ham, they've made some good signings actually, and they've still kept Declan Rice, mainly because they've outpriced anyone from coming in for him, but obviously he's a key player for them. Why don't I think they'll get into the top 6 then, when they were so close last season? They've kept Declan Rice and they've strengthened, mainly just because, and this could change, but if you look at how they play, West Ham, particularly against big teams, they play as if they're a small team, so they will let the team have all of the ball and try and catch them on the counter-attack, like someone in the lower mid-table would do. For example, they don't play like they're one of the big boys, and for me, if you don't play like you're one of the big boys or believe that you're one of the big boys through your play, you're never gonna truly break in to that top 6 and establish yourself as a top 6, because you don't even believe it yourself, if that makes sense. So I think the fact they still view themselves as an outsider will limit them from truly breaking into that top 6. But I think in terms of their belief, their mentality more generally, and David Moyes' astuteness in the transfer market and just how he sets them up, I do think they're clear of whoever's behind them, and they're not quite good enough to be ahead of them. So I think they're sort of comfortably 7th. There was no one else I was really thinking of putting in this position than West Ham, and there was nowhere else where I would put West Ham other than in 7th. So sort of a similar sort of season for West Ham, but you got to think they could make it into the Europa League should they win the Conference League, which, given the quality of teams in the Conference League, they've got a good chance of doing so. In 6th place, I've gone for Manchester United. Now, out of the top 6, this was easily the easiest one to predict. I just can't see United getting in the top 4 this season. There's too much uncertainty in the club, really, and surrounding the club for me to put them any higher than this. Erik ten Hag, a very good manager for Ajax, but the transfer window hasn't been very encouraging for Manchester United. Martinez, questions about his height, but ultimately a good centre-back. Did they really need another centre-back? I don't know if they did. Malacia, good young fullback, but again, did they need a centre-back? Christian Eriksen, good player, very good player. Did they need him? Potentially not, with both Fernandes and Van der Beek already being at the club. However, they haven't signed that defensive midfielder. For God's sake, United, all you've needed for years is a defensive midfielder. Arguably no much more than now, because Ten Hag's system really needs a dependable defensive midfielder to work. You can't play Fred in that position because you're gonna get exposed. They've been chasing De Jong all summer, but it's become a bit of a circus really, to the point that just move on to other targets, because it's clear that De Jong doesn't even want to go there. It's a bit embarrassing really. You're chasing De Jong, a player who doesn't even really want to leave Barcelona, or not to go to United anyway. Yeah, it's a bit embarrassing. They need to get De Jong really, but even if they don't get De Jong, they just need a defensive midfielder, because Ten Hag can't play his way with Fred or McTominay in that pivot position. They do have some promising players. James Garner was very good at Nottingham Forest, could be like a new signing to Man United to play in that midfield really. Put him alongside a nice defensive midfielder, then I think he could be really good for Man United. Forward options, you've obviously got Rashford, Sancho, but Sancho's a good player. I think this could be a pivotal season for him, really, because he was a bit unlucky last season. Rashford is a do-or-die season for Marcus Rashford, really, in terms of if he's just in bad form or if he's just never going to be back to the player he was. Up front, there's some issues, actually. I suggested in another video that they could play Bruno Fernandes as a false 9 as a replacement for Ronaldo. It seems like in pre-season he's playing Martial, and I understand why. Martial's someone who can press, and it's his last United lifeline, so he's going to be putting in the effort to impress Erik ten Hag, unlike certain other players. But ultimately, he's had many chances now. He's not good enough for Manchester United. I know that, you know that, and ultimately ten Hag knows that, but it's probably just more of a stopgap, really. They need another striker, especially if Ronaldo goes. And speaking about Ronaldo, just get him out of the club, for God's sake. I mentioned it in a previous video. You just need to get him out. If he doesn't want to be there, just get him out, because he's a disruptive presence in the dressing room at the best of times, let alone if he doesn't want to be there. It undermines Ten Hag, and it makes it hard for him to really implement his ideas. If you've got a player like Ronaldo around there who you've got to factor in, who doesn't even want to be there, do you know if he's staying? Do you know if he's going? Who knows? But it's hard to make plans for the season without knowing if he's staying or going. I think it would be the best for both club and player if they parted ways, but it doesn't look like that's going to happen, or will it? I don't know. But the uncertainty surrounding Cristiano Ronaldo probably hasn't helped their pre-season preparations. They've looked good in pre-season, but without a really good defensive midfielder, without Frankie de Jong really, and without some other signings. Their transfers, the players aren't bad, but they're not what they needed. It seems like they've gone out and signed your squad players before you sign your first teamers. So the transfer business has been questionable. It will take time, I think, for Erik ten Hag to implement his philosophy. But will he be able to do that without the right players? He needs to do that. I don't know. But there's too much uncertainty around Manchester United for me to put them any higher than this. In 5th place, this may surprise some people, I've gone for Tottenham. Now, many people are hyping Tottenham up to potentially challenge for the title, or even break into the top 2. Ludicrous, in my opinion. I don't understand what people are seeing in this Tottenham side. Yes, they're managed by one of the best managers around in Antonio Conte. Yes, they had a very good end to last season, but to me, if you look at that team, it's just not on the level of the top 2, really. And I don't think they've had as good a window as everyone's saying. They've made some okay signings. Perisic is a good short-term option at left-back, but it's nothing more than a short-term option at wing-back. It's really meaning that they have to do something in the next year or two. I'm not sure if they will. Longley is an okay upgrade on Ben Davies, but he's not the best defender in the world. Basuma's a very good addition at midfield. Richarlison's an okay depth player, but ultimately it's a lot of money on a depth player, really. So I don't really rate Richarlison. He's okay, but I think he's quite an overrated player, really. Jed Spence is a decent fullback. I say decent. He was very good in the Championship last year. But why I say that is I don't know if he's first choice for Spurs. I can see them trying to bed him in, which is possibly a problem because I don't rate Emerson Royale at all. They've got some good players. Obviously, that front three of Kane, Kulusevski and Son is incredible and will score them lots of goals. But ultimately, I just don't know if you can win the title or even challenge for the title playing more pragmatic, counter-attacking football. I just think you've got to play a bit better football to do that, really. You've got to present yourself with a bit more quality. And this team is good at playing Conte ball, but ultimately, is it better than the next 4 teams? I don't know. And I think the difference is, from in this season than last season, they've had a lot of money to spend, and there's pressure on Spurs now. People are hyping them up. There's pressure on them to make the top 4, because people are not just saying they'll make the top 4, people are saying they'll comfortably make the top 4. There's pressure on Spurs in a way in which there just simply wasn't last season. No one expected anything from them last season. Even when Conte came in, no one expected them to push for top 4. So yeah, there's pressure on them now, and yeah, I don't know, I think people are hyping Spurs up a bit too much. Ultimately, I ummed quite a lot between this team and the team that's in 4th place. I could have done either or, but I just have a better feeling about the team in 4th place than I do about Spurs. So yeah, they've had a decent transfer window, they've got a decent team, but ultimately, I just think Spurs are a bit overrated at the moment, really. And I think that ultimately there's more pressure on them this season. So yeah, I could easily see them finishing 4th ultimately. There's not much to justify them finishing here. But yeah, I don't know. I just think there's a bit more pressure on them, and that could lead them to finish a place below what they managed to achieve last year. In 4th place and breaking into the top 4, doing something they didn't manage to do last season, I've got Arsenal. Now, I was very harsh on Arsenal last year. I really like Arsenal. I think this team is incredibly likeable, and I really like what they've been doing in the transfer market. Last season it was bringing in sort of unknown underground players for, a decent amount of money, I suppose, but these were players who some may have said were unproven, people like Tomiyasu, Ben White, Lokonga, people like that, bringing in youth like Martinelli, Bukayo Saka, people like that. A very young and experienced team, but it reminds me of Liverpool and what Klopp has managed to do at Liverpool, buying these underground players that no one else is really looking at, but players who will come in and will play for the badge, play for the shirt, follow a manager's philosophy. That's what these Arsenal players have managed to do, and they look like a new team under Arteta. I was at the start of last season saying, get Arteta out, he's had enough time. They've given him more time, and it's worked miracles, honestly. This Arsenal team looks so good, so fluid, so just playing as one, and the signings have been really good as well. I was sceptical about Jesus going to Arsenal because I thought, is he the man to score lots of goals for Arsenal? Never really managed it at City in that number 9 role, but in pre-season he looks like a monster. And Zinchenko, I think, is a really smart piece of business. He can cover at left back when Tierney's injured, and he can also play in Xhaka's position as an upgrade on Xhaka. I think that's a really smart bit of business as well. I just think Arsenal are a really likeable team, and when you've got a young team like this one, they've all got lots of high potential, so they're only going to get better, and if they get better, progress as a team, there's no reason why next season or the season after they couldn't be challenging for the title. I'm serious. But a young manager, a young team, all progressing together, if you keep the bulk of the squad together, you keep players like Saka, I think the sky's the limit for this team, honestly. Yeah, it may seem odd for me to be praising Arsenal this much, but I'm very impressed by what they've been doing in the transfer market, the team and the squad cohesion that they've managed to build. And in terms of Spurs, whereas they're building for the short term, it's almost do or die for them. There's lots of pressure on them because certain players like Perisic will be gone, they'll be too old. People like Conte, he'll be out the door, and then what are you left with? I don't know. But with Arsenal, they're building for the long term, and I think this could really pay off. It's very exciting times at Arsenal. There's a very positive buzz around the club, and I've been, indoctrinated into it. I'll be honest. I'm very positive about Arsenal. So yeah, I think they'll do one better 4th place, and there'll be nothing better to Arsenal fans than knocking Spurs out of the top 4 and securing a place themselves. In 3rd place, I've gone for Chelsea, predicting them to finish where they finished last season. People are really underrating Chelsea this season, I think. It's giving me flashbacks to last season where Liverpool had a dodgy season, filled with injuries, underperformed, and then people are writing them off saying, they could even not finish in the top 4 of these unproven teams. Man United are so much better than them, they'll finish ahead of them, and look what happened. Liverpool got back to form, proved their worth once again, and ultimately you all sat there thinking, why did we ever doubt Liverpool? I'm getting sort of flashback to that, but with Chelsea, they struggled last season. There was the Lukaku fiasco, struggling to score goals, injuries to key players like in the fullback areas, to Reece James and Ben Chilwell. They struggled last season ultimately, but I think that should they have a full fit team, they're easily the 3rd best team in the league. They've also made additions in terms of Raheem Sterling, who I think is a really smart bit of business actually. And some other signings as well. Cucurella, it's a lot of money for a player I don't really think they need. But Koulibaly is a smart, almost I'd argue, upgrade on Rudiger. I think that ultimately people are underrating this Chelsea team. Yes, certain players didn't have a great season last season, but when you have a fully fit Chelsea team, I still think they're easily the 3rd best team in the league. And yeah, don't write off Chelsea. Lots of people are writing off Chelsea and getting on the Tottenham hype, but ultimately, football fans have short memories, as I said before. I think if you look at that squad on paper, they've still got lots and lots of good players of Chelsea. I think that they just need to try and score some goals. It's a big season for Kai Havertz in that false 9 role. Is he good enough to score goals on a consistent basis, or do they need number 9, or a good number 9, not someone like Romelu Lukaku? I don't know. That could maybe be their undoing, depending on how that goes. I think if he's really good, they could challenge for the title. If Kai Havertz isn't very good, that's where they maybe could struggle. But ultimately, I do think people are sort of writing off Chelsea for no real reason. I still think Tuchel's a quality manager. Some of their business has been a bit questionable, i.e. Cucurella and the sort of prices I'm being seen banding around for Wesley Fofana. I don't even necessarily know if they need another centre-back, so yeah, it's maybe the owners in Todd Bowley's maybe throwing around cash a bit irresponsibly, but ultimately I think that they easily have the 3rd best squad in the league, and it'll be a comfortable finish for Chelsea. People are writing them off. I'm not really sure why. In second place, and yes, I'm biased, you obviously know who number 1 is now, and you're probably thinking, George, this is just purely biased because you support Liverpool, and yes it is, but ultimately sometimes you've just got to back your team based on no logic whatsoever. So yes, I've gone for Manchester City in second place. Why? Because for some reason I'm backing Liverpool to go into first place. That's really all it is. Ultimately, City are an incredible team, and look at that squad. It just reflects that. The addition of Erling Haaland is incredible. I think once City sort of learn how to accommodate him best, because if you look at the Community Shield, him and De Bruyne weren't really on the same wavelength. Once they get on the same wavelength, it'll be deadly for Premier League defenders, honestly. Bournemouth are not going to enjoy playing Erling Haaland. Erling Haaland will be a monster because he is practically a machine already. He's an AI, really. He's a robot. He's incredible. But yeah, that's obviously an incredible signing for Manchester City. Obviously, it will take a little bit of time to really acclimatise to playing with that number 9 and playing to Haaland's strengths. But as I said, once they do, De Bruyne playing in balls for Erling Haaland, it'll be deadly. I also think someone like Julian Alvarez is an underrated signing. He's gone under the radar a bit because of Haaland. He's the bigger name, but ultimately on the wing and through the middle, I think Julian Alvarez is a very exciting player. And obviously, Calvin Phillips, they've signed for a lot of money for a backup player. He is ultimately going to be second choice behind Rodri, but obviously you can do a lot worse than having backup defensive midfielders. Calvin Phillips is a very good player. The only area they're looking slightly light at is in fullbacks. João Cancelo is incredible. He's really, really good. Kyle Walker, decent. He's a good right back. I'm surprised they haven't looked at perhaps upgrading him at this point. But hey ho, there you go. They haven't really got much in the way of backup fullbacks. They have obviously missed out on Marc Cucurella, who they wanted, so he's gone to Chelsea. Ultimately, I think Cancelo on the right and Cucurella on the left could have been a very interesting evolution for Manchester City. Obviously, they've missed out on him. They're looking quite light in those areas, and injuries, whether João Cancelo or Kyle Walker, could be quite worrying. But other than that, it's obviously a very good team. I think it's a big season for Jack Grealish. He sort of went under the radar because Romelu Lukaku was so bad, but he also cost 100 million and he wasn't very good, really. Jack Grealish, a bit of a flop last season. It's a big season for him, really. Obviously, the pressure's sort of off of him. He's out of the spotlight because Haaland's there. I think this could be the season where Jack Grealish really comes into his own at Manchester City, or it could be the season where you say, hey, this is a failed experiment. Maybe you and this team just aren't really compatible. But obviously, Manchester City are an incredible team, managed by one of the best managers in the world. They'll probably win the league. Really, there's not much to say that they shouldn't finish first, other than just a feeling that I have. So yes, in first place, I've gone for Liverpool. Purely out of bias, yes. I just have a feeling though, and it's based on no logic whatsoever other than just a feeling that I have that Liverpool are going to win the league this season. They were really good in the Community Shield. It was a very positive performance, and after that, they've won the Community Shield, which they haven't managed to do before. I don't know, I just get a really positive feeling that this is going to be Liverpool's year. Obviously, they've lost Sadio Mane, and that is a big loss, and for a ridiculous fee as well. It's far too low for what he's worth. I'm still vexed about that. But they brought in Darwin Núñez, and yes, it will take a little bit of time for Núñez to acclimatise. I don't expect him to be first choice straight away. You still have 5 quality forwards in Mohamed Salah, Luis Diaz, Diogo Jota, Roberto Firmino, and now Darwin Núñez to really cover up for the fact that Mane's leaving, but I don't think it will affect Liverpool that much. You've got a natural Mane replacement in Luis Diaz. It's a big season for him to step up in terms of his goal scoring. I think he will. Really, and Jota's quality, if he can rediscover that form that he found at the start of last season, he'll be deadly. And obviously Salah, we know what an incredible player he is. And yeah, I don't know, I just have a feeling about Liverpool that this will be their year. Yeah, I don't know, I just think that the team started the season very well in the Community Shield. They obviously missed out on the Champions League and the league last year, which really fired them up to push on this season. I have similar vibes to what I had at the start of the season where they won the league in 1920. just a similar sort of vibe, and everyone's expecting City to win the league. It's almost too obvious for City to win the league now they've got Haaland. It's too obvious for them to walk the league, essentially, with that much quality in their team, that I just think that Liverpool will be able to just sneak in and win the league. As I said, is it based on logic? Not really. But I just have a feeling. And ultimately, when it's hard to decipher at the top, you've got to back your team, and that's what I've done. I think Fabio Carvalho is a really astute and exciting signing from Fulham. He just gives me vibes of Felipe Coutinho. I don't know whether that's just the positional similarities. He looks a bit similar to him. Yeah, I don't know. I think he'll be a really, almost like a dark horse in this Liverpool team. I think he could have a really exciting season from nowhere, really. And Harvey Elliott as well, a big season for him. Obviously his season was ended sort of prematurely, really, in terms of first team action early on last season. His progress could continue into this season and he could flourish in that midfield. So yeah, ultimately I think it's a big season for some of Liverpool's midfielders. Jones, Keita, Chamberlain. I think this is the season where they stay or go, depending on if they step up or not. A big season for Jones because he broke through a couple seasons back and he hasn't really progressed. Big season for him because people are talking about Jude Bellingham. You need to try and prove why they don't need him by really stepping up. But yeah, Liverpool quality all over the pitch. Great defence, great goalkeeper, great forward options. And yeah, everyone's saying City, but I actually just have a feeling that this will be Liverpool's year. It's based on nothing other than just fan delusion. I'm welcome to admit that. But I just have a feeling that Jordan Henderson will be lifting the Premier League trophy at the end of the season. And God, I hope it's true. So there we go, those are my predictions. Perhaps some odd ones before, but I put a lot of thought into this, umming and ahhing, switching different teams. And I think it's possibly my most likely to happen set of predictions than the last two prediction videos I did. Yeah, I'm quite confident in these actually. City will probably win the league, but I don't know, I've just got a little bit of faith about Liverpool. Fingers crossed. But yeah, what do you think about my predictions then? Do you agree with them? Do you massively disagree with them? Whatever you think, drop your thoughts in the comment section below and let's start a discussion. That's always fun. And of course, what are your Premier League predictions? Whatever they are, drop your thoughts in the comment section below and we can have a discussion about them. That's always fun. Hopefully I get more than 2 right, because since doing these videos, that's my record. It's 2 correct places. Let's try and get more. I'd hope so. That would be great, wouldn't it? But yes, whatever you think, hit the like button, obviously, if you like the video, and there'll be lots more football content coming. But yes, thank you guys for watching, and of course, a goodbye.